taken. Why? Because in order to be successful in these negotiations, you actually need to spend time building relationships and trust. So when there's a moment of crisis, there's something to build on. And in Myanmar, for us, in about 2012, 2013, we went to Aung San Suu Kyi, who was still then in the opposition, building up towards elections. And after this was Governor Bill Richardson, the late governor, and myself. We were partners in all this for 17 years until he passed away last September. We went and we met with Aung San Suu Kyi, and we asked her, okay, how can we help? How can we help in the transition? And she gave us a bunch of things that she wanted. Then we met with the military. We asked them how we can help in the transition. Long story short, for the next 7 years, I was leading delegations of Americans. Some of them were investor delegations. Some of them were social entrepreneurs, responding to what the people of Myanmar wanted as a part of this transition. We did political training in the parliament over there. A long time of engagement and building those relationships, which was not for the sake of maybe one day they'll kidnap an American and then we'll get him out, but because it was worthwhile. It was valuable, it was genuine, that engagement, which is a part of what we do. All of that was going pretty well until about 2018, where Aung San Suu Kyi already was in power and then asked us to join a little commission on her behalf to help with a conflict that was brewing, or that was not only brewing, was exploding in the west of Myanmar, on the border with Bangladesh, with a Muslim minority called the Rohingyas. And we stepped in. And my mindset on that one, when I was planning for this, was, look, Aung San Suu Kyi probably really wants to do the right thing, but she's constrained by the military. So she's asking us to come in and basically provide her cover so she can have the space to do the right thing. That was my approach. That was my understanding of the situation and my understanding of her. And at that point, I've met her about 7, 8 times already. So I thought, like, I was confident. I understand her. I know her. Now, the time that we went in 2018, she was holding 2 Reuters journalists in prison. One of them, Wallon, is a good friend of mine, because they reported of mass killing with the Rohingyas. So the military arrested them and jailed them. We thought, that's what we do, right? So if we go there to help her on this conflict, we can definitely ask her to release them. And because she's just asking, she just wants the space to do the right thing, she'll do it. Boy, I was wrong. We went in, we had this meeting, and again, because of the assumption that I came in, the strategy that we built for Governor Richardson on this, in this meeting, the approach was, look, we're your friends. We've been friends for 20 years. We're here to help. In order for us to help, we really need you to do this. You need to release those hostages. Now, if I were right with my assumption, she would have used that and said, look, you know, despite the stance of the judicial, I understand that this is a need, this is a gesture of goodwill, blah, blah. She didn't. She dug in. She referred to them as traitors, the Reuters journalists. She started asking, she asked us actually in this meeting, when will you in the West stop trying to impose Muslims on Myanmar? And at that point, you know, when you have that moment when you hear like a glass shatter, I had that moment over there, and we realized, oh boy, I was wrong in my assessment. And the next 2 days were about how we extracted ourselves out of Myanmar before we got detained, because that meeting devolved into screaming matches. It was pretty terrible. And I left Myanmar that time feeling, A, I failed. I failed my friend. He's going to stay in jail because we couldn't get him out because I didn't realize the situation. I didn't read it correctly. And second, I was sad because I grew to really love that country, and I felt like I'm never coming back here after that. That was 2018. Now fast forward 3 years, Aung San Suu Kyi is now in jail herself. They've taken Danny Fenster, and we need to figure out how we get in again. Ironically, the military feels like, well, these are the guys that actually had a fight with Aung San Suu Kyi, so we like them. So we had an in. Welcome to my really, really counterintuitive and convoluted world. So we dove into it. But of course, you can't just go to a country like that and say, hey guys, we're coming to negotiate the release of a political prisoner. Because they'll tell you, what political prisoner? We have a criminal, not a political prisoner, of course. So you have to work out a theme of a trip, of a mission that makes sense to them, even though they know exactly why we're coming. But publicly, it needs to be different. And in this case, we're in the United States, we were towards the end of the pandemic. We had the vaccines. In Myanmar, vaccines were not available yet because of sanctions. And so we built a whole agenda of our trip of trying to actually get vaccines to children in Myanmar and doing protection gear and all of that stuff, and worked with them a little bit to get the invitation. In August, so this is 3 months into this, it takes time. In August, we get the invitation, finally to come. And so we're very excited. The day we get the invitation, our own State Department turns on us. Before, they were very supportive of us in getting involved and trying to help. At that point, suddenly, they said, no, don't go. And it went back and forth for quite a while. And just to make it very clear, they didn't say don't go because State Department is evil. They didn't say don't go because they're bad people or because they didn't want Danny Fenster to come home. They said no, I believe, because they were very worried that if we go there and we meet with the general, the head of the military government, and ask him for Danny Fenster, he's going to ask for something in return from the US government that the US government is unwilling to give. And they felt that if we're going to push them into a corner, and they didn't want that. But we don't work for them. We work for the family. But we try to coordinate. So at first we delayed. They asked us to delay for different reasons. They thought that it will be resolved by itself, and it wasn't. Every 2 weeks he was detained for another 2 weeks, etc. 2 months pass, and we basically said, guys, we're going. We can't keep delaying this. The guy is building up his time in prison over there in the middle of a pandemic. Any day he can get sick, something bad can happen over there. We need to go. And we had this conversation with Wendy Sherman, who was the Deputy Secretary of State at the time. And she says, okay, I understand, you have to go. But please delink your humanitarian trip from Danny Fenster. In other words, don't raise him when you're there. Which is kind of an awkward thing. Again, it makes sense from their perspective, but not from ours. But the governor had to say, well, okay, if we do that, will you be positive publicly about our trip? And she said, yeah, of course, I'll do that. So now we knew we were going, but we knew that according to the State Department, we had told them that we will not raise Danny Fenster when we're there. I still needed to get a mandate from the family to raise Danny Fenster when I'm there if I have the opportunity. So I get on the phone with Brian, his brother, and I say, hey, Brian, good news, we're going. The trip that we've been talking about for a couple of months, we're going. In 2 days, we're getting on a plane, we're flying over there, all logistics are done. But you need to know that the State Department has asked us not to raise your brother when we're there. And I let it linger. And his response did not surprise me. He said, well, I guess if the government says that, maybe they know what they're talking about. Here's why. As a family, and I don't wish it on any family in the world, when something like that happens, you are in a world of misinformation and partial information. Everybody's bombarding you, and you tend to believe your government. And when the White House or the State Department calls you and says, hey, this is important, if you do this, it might hurt your loved one, you believe that. So I expected that answer. And so I said, yes, I understand. But hey, Brian, if we have an opportunity to bring him home when we're there, we're not going to leave him behind, right? And he kind of laughed. He's like, hey, yeah, no, if you can bring him home, please don't leave him behind. Click, I had my mandate. That's the space. That's the only space we could get, and that's the space that we needed. And so we went, and I told the governor, this time I'm not going to fail. I'm not going to make the same mistakes. This is going to succeed. And so I took everything that I've messed up with Aung San Suu Kyi before and applied it here. And I started watching speeches by the general, the head of the military government, I watched him being interviews. Now, he doesn't speak English. I don't speak Myanmar. But I was trying but the substance wasn't what matters to me. It wasn't about national interest. It was about trying to find out who he is as an individual, his personality, something that I can learn about him, because I had absolutely no leverage unless I created an emotional leverage with him, a connection of sorts. And as I was watching his speeches, you would assume a military general that just conducted a coup against the powerful Aung San Suu Kyi, that he will be one of those, like, you know, charismatic, bombastic individuals. And I was shocked to see, you know, his voice is very low. He doesn't project. There's zero charisma there. He's subdued. He's an introvert. None of it is bad, but it's just not what you expect. And I figured out, that's probably our in. And so we built up a strategy on this, and we said, when we're going there, first, we're not going to do what we did with Aung San Suu Kyi. We don't raise the issue of Danny Fenster with any other person from his side in the room. Because if we do that, he's going to be defensive, he's going to dig in, and we're not going to get anywhere. So we're going to have the meeting with him, and we're going to do exactly what we came to do, what we said that we'll do, which is talk about COVID, talk about our plan on the vaccines and the protective gear and all that stuff. And then 5 minutes at the end, you, Governor, you tell the general, hey, can you and I just spend 5 minutes together alone? And you send everybody out. And in those 5 minutes, I gave the governor a handwritten note, which is, we always do that trick. It's a handwritten note as if it's the governor's notes, but the governor will accidentally leave it behind. So it will be stayed there for record, because, so it's written that way. And the first thing that the governor had to do when he walked in that one-on-one, was to tell the general, look, I've been doing this for decades. I've been meeting with leaders all over the world. And I know you're supposed to be this big general and bombastic and loud and all of that stuff, but I see you. You have a quiet leadership. You're different. That's very, very good. It's very powerful. You should stick with that. And by doing that point, we tried to send 2 messages to the general. Number one, the governor actually spent time studying him, looking at him, seeing him, invested in this relationship. He cares about this. And number two, we gambled that his lack of charisma and his introvert personality is something that he's insecure about. But pointing that out from our perspective, saying this is actually a strength, might win him over. Now, I was not in the room because it was one-on-one, but the meeting that was supposed to be 5 minutes ended up being 45 minutes when I'm outside, kind of like, what's going on in there? And when the governor told me the story afterwards, he said, as soon as he said that with the leader took his glasses off. And they went into a very personal conversation. The leader explained to him how he never really wanted to be the head of the country, how his wife is mad at him because her life is now different, and his kids don't talk to him because they're forced to do different things. It became really, really personal. So the governor knew he was on a roll here. So he went to his second point. He said, look, you know, I'm going to be absolutely criticized by everybody for coming here and seeing you, because the US government doesn't talk to you. And they think that I'm coming, I'm legitimizing you. But I'm a politician, I don't care. I have thick skin, let them criticize me. I'm here because I love the people of Myanmar and I want to help the people of Myanmar. But if you want to help me with these critics, there's this young kid here, Danny Fenster. If you give him to me, it will shut them up. And the leader looks at him and he says, is Danny Fenster a big story in the United States? He says, well, you know, if you release him to me, it will be a big story in the United States. But I don't want you to do it for that. I want you to do it for me, as a favor for me. And the leader looked at him and he said, you know what? I'm going to give you Danny Fenster. I'm going to do it here, but it will take me 2 weeks. Will you come and see me again? And the governor, of course, said, yeah, of course I'll come see you again. He said, but nobody can know about this, because there are things that I need to do. Now, this was still in the pandemic, there were no commercial flights. So this was about, the way we got there was to fly from here to Doha, and then from Doha we had to chart a private jet in order to get there, 6.5 hours flight and back. Extremely expensive for a small non-for-profit. So I realized, oh no, now we have to do it again. This is, you know, I need to come up with a solution. But we came back, we started flying, we flew back, really long flight. And as we're on the plane, we understood why he needed the time. He needed to accelerate and finish Danny Fenster's trial before he could pardon him. And he finished his trial while we were still on the plane and sentenced him for 11 years in prison. Now, to everybody in the normal world, this sounds like a setback. To people in my world, the logic is the bigger the sentence, the more grandiose the gesture of the pardon is. And so, ironically for us, that was a good sign. But boy, we were being butchered on social media. Because not only did we go there and didn't get him, we got her and we got there and we got him maximum sentencing, 11 years. And everybody was criticizing us, human rights organizations, politicians, everybody, useful idiots, everything was thrown at us. Even the State Department called his family to tell him that our visit was a setback. Now again, I understand the sentiment of why they felt, because they were not able to get him back, so it's nice to blame somebody else for it. But on the plane, the governor asked me, are you going to go to Detroit to explain to them what's happening? And we talked about it and we decided that I will not. And the reason is because they're hearing from the government that we just hurt their kid. They saw that he received 11 years in jail, like they're completely in turmoil. And if I go there and I have a bad meeting with them and they take us off the case, we will not have a mandate to go back and get him. So we decided we'll just take the hit for 2 weeks, and if we're right, it's not going to matter when we bring him home. And so we came back home here. It was brutal, but it only took 2 days until I got a text from the chief of staff of the leader to say, hey, your special package is ready. Can you come here on Monday to pick him up? So this was 4 days warning to get there. Now I had to put this mission together. The plane that we flew the first time was not available. I was trying to find a plane everywhere. Ended up finding a Lebanese-owned plane that was willing to fly there, and the pilots were willing to only rest for 4 hours before returning instead of the required 12. All of these kind of things. And then realized, oh, but in the note from the chief of staff, they said, oh, by the way, would Governor Richardson be willing to bring his wife on this trip because they would like to do dinner together? And it's like, oh my God, we really overshot on that personal relationship here. But the truth was, by the way, again, it wasn't a bluff. It was a genuine thing. You invest in a person. It has to be genuine. It has to be authentic. You invest in a person. Of course, we said the First Lady is not going to be able to make this trip, but maybe in the future. So I found that plane, and we're all running around. And then I realized I have 3 problems that I just didn't think about before. Number one, I'm putting this guy on a plane. I don't even have his passport or his full name as it appears on the passport. And I can't ask his family because they don't know we're going. And I can't ask the State Department because they don't know that we're going. So I asked the military government of Myanmar. And they delivered a copy of the passport within an hour, which served a purpose that I didn't intend to show me that they're actually serious he's coming home. So I solved that problem. Then I realized, oh no. So we're getting him on our plane, we're flying him into Doha, but from there we have to fly commercially. We're not doing a charter, transatlantic. We had to get, remember pandemic time, I had to have a COVID test, PCR test confirmed before you put somebody on a plane. Otherwise it doesn't work. And I can't ask the US Embassy to provide me that test because they don't know that we're going. So we came up with an idea. We said, okay, we're going to basically, once we're airborne, we have 6 hours, we're going to call our friends in Qatar. Okay, the Qataris. This is before October 7th and all that. We'll have to call the Qataris and ask them for an ambulance When we land, we had 4 hours gap to give us the test and check him. And of course, for that, we needed Wi-Fi on the plane, which the Lebanese plane didn't have. So we had to install that Wi-Fi. It was $15,000, the most expensive Wi-Fi service I've ever had to pay for. Worth it, because the Qataris actually delivered on that one. When we called them from the plane, they said, oh yeah, we'll get you an ambulance, but will Governor Richardson be willing to do an Al Jazeera interview on the tarmac? And I'm like over there, like on the plane, I was like, Gov, are you ready to do this? And Danny Fenster hears that, and he's like, I'll do it. So the Qataris were very excited. They were so excited about that interview that they also helped us pay back for the charter flight, which saved our finances on this. So we figured out a solution for the second problem. The last problem we had, which I really didn't see coming, the owner of the Lebanese jet, 12 hours before departure, looks at the manifesto and says, why are there 4 people going in and 5 people coming out? Who is that 5th person? And the operator who's running these charters saying, you know, innocently say, oh, that's a prisoner they're getting back. The Lebanese owner of the plane was like, wait, no, I need a letter from the Department of State to confirm that this is legit. He's like, well, you can't have it because they don't know that we're going. But I figured out he thinks that we're going guns blazing to do a rescue mission with his plane. And so I signed an affidavit confirming that there's no guns involved, nobody has a gun on this plane, and that before we board with the prisoner, we will have release papers in English. And thank God he said, fine, we'll do that. And there it was, a Lebanese plane with a Lebanese crew flying a former IDF special ops to save a Jewish journalist from an anti-Muslim government. Talking about the Netflix, hopefully one day. But I wanted to tell that story because I think it has different elements of what it is that we do. First of all, the fact that it highlights the fact we're not government. And yes, we collaborate with our government when it makes sense. We coordinate with them always, but sometimes it's antagonistic. And it's not because they're bad and we're good. It's because we're like horse with blinders. We have a certain mandate. When our government gets involved in things like that, there's complex issues for them. So jumping on Russia for a second here, when Americans and Russians meet, and even if they want to talk about the political prisoners, the weight of Ukraine, the weight of nuclear stability, the weight of world order lies on them before they even say the first word. And that makes it very complicated. But when we go in to meet with the Russians, they can talk to us about Ukraine. We have zero mandate on this, or zero authority. So we listen, but we can insulate the issue of the prisoners and refine and define what a pathway to return looks like. So that's the first one. The second one, to me, it shows the power of emotional intelligence. That this is not only about national interest, that it's about people and it's about relationships. And it's something that within the US government, all the agencies, the CIA does really well. It's human-centered because they need to turn people. But for some reason, not the White House, not the State Department, no other agency in the US government is focused on the human center of this. And it's something we've lost. And that's something that is a passion of mine to work on. And I think it can be done from outside government. So these are kind of the reasons why I wanted to jump on this. This is kind of what I do. This is the type of work that it does. The book itself was finished. I joke around and I did it on the podcast. Somebody asked me, oh, what's in the book? I was like, I don't know. I finished it a year ago. I don't even remember what's in it. But the true part of it is that, yes, the book was finished before October 7th. And October 7th, it feels like it's 8.5 months ago, or 8 months ago. But it feels like it's a universe ago. So all these stories are there, but life has moved on. Governor Richardson passed away in September. So my whole experience and the work that we've been doing on Gaza has been without him. And it's been pretty intense. I'll just tease a little bit of it and then I'll open up because I know that, on time, we want to make sure that there's enough conversation. I know that Gaza lays on our hearts, and instead of assuming what you want to hear, I would rather have you ask me, and I will respond to this. But immediately after October 7th, I started getting bombarded by families of people. At that point, they didn't know that they're hostages. They knew that they were missing. And they all got funneled to me because of Leah Goldin. Leah Goldin is the mother of Hadar Goldin, who was killed by Hamas in the ceasefire, an hour into the ceasefire in 2014, and his body has been held by Hamas, and we've been working with her, trying to figure out a way to bring her son's body back home. And she called me and she said, Mickey, you know how for 10 years nobody listens to me? Well, guess what? I'm being bombarded now by families of missing Israelis. Can I send them to you? I said, absolutely. And very quickly we started getting, again, it went up to 67 of these families very quickly, asking us for help. And we had to make an assessment very quickly of what is our theory of return. The script, the story, the way that people come home in order to build the strategy. And in this case, it was very basic at the beginning. Assumptions, to you, it will feel very easy to, or obvious. Israel and Hamas don't talk to each other directly. So there's no direct negotiations, and even the type of negotiations that I did between Israel and Hamas back in 2007, 2008, over Gilad Shalit, another Israeli soldier that was held hostage at the time, even those kind of proximity talks are not even in the cards. Those proximity talks, where we would go to Vienna in a hotel, and we had Mossad in one floor and Hamas on another floor, and we'll be running between them. Not available on October 7th. So that's number one. Number two, there are countries and entities that can influence Hamas. Iran, Turkey, Qatar, Egypt. None of them control Hamas, but all of them have some sort of leverage and influence over them. None of those want to do favors to Israel. But at least two of them do want to do favors to the United States. And from here, we developed our theory of return. We needed to make this an American story, an American priority as soon as humanly possible. Because if it's an American presidential priority, then the Qataris and the Egyptians, especially the Qataris from my calculation, because I've known them and worked with them positively in getting Americans out of other places, they can go to Hamas and say to them, hey, this is not about Israel, this is about the President of the United States and our relationship there. Don't make us choose. We need you to solicit, we need you to give us proposals of how we resolve this hostage thing. And once the Qataris are able to get a proposal, if it's half decent, and none of these deals are pretty, and none of them are fair, and none of them are just, but if they're feasible, then the United States government can work with the Israeli government to figure out how they're comfortable enough to do them. That was the theory of return. And we went to work on that one very quickly. We started from all the list of the families, trying to understand how many Americans we can gather in. And I was, give me Americans, give me American permanent residents, give me students, people who studied in the United States before, onto any linkage to United States, because I needed to get that information. And the first call I did was to the Qataris, just to test my theory of return, whether it makes sense to them, which they said yes, but Mickey, for that, we need a video, we need an evidence that we can show Hamas that the President of the United States wants this resolved. This was, again, this is October 8th and October 9th. Israel is, there's still Hamas inside Israel, okay? The Israeli government is not talking to these families. Everybody's scrambling for information. I think the Israeli government didn't realize that the families are a source of information. They were just afraid of talking to them because they knew that it'll be a nightmare and they didn't have much. They didn't realize that those families are trying to provide information. So we were able, Leah Goldin put a call center and started soliciting information, and we got to the Americans by October 8th, late October 8th, our time, a list of 18 Americans that were missing. Then that list went up to 23, then it went down to 12, then it went down to 8. Unfortunately, the going down is when we discovered and we found out of casualties that were found. You know, they were not in Gaza, they were actually still in Israel, the remains. But the Americans and the administration were extremely quick on this one. And I can be very critical of this administration for other cases that have been trying to work, like Danny Fenster and like in Russia. But when it came to Gaza and the hostages, the president jumped on it immediately. And he met with the families first on Zoom, And then he met them in person within 5 days. And I told these families, by the way, I'm working with families of American hostages, 11, 16 years held. They haven't yet received the phone call from the White House. So perspective, this is significant. And I believe that when Biden did that, what you saw was not political calculation, you saw the raw DNA of President Biden. That was his instinct. This is who he is. That's before politics come into play. That's the gut reaction of a human being. The Qataris took that video and said, this is great, this is what we needed, the first Zoom. And they went to Hamas and they said, hey, we're going to have this channel, it's an American issue, we need a proof of concept. We need to prove to the Americans that we can do this. 2 American women were released for that, as a gesture, just to prove concept. The Israelis didn't even know that it's coming. Yeah, they knew about it just in the last minute, and then they took a helicopter and took them out from Egypt after the border. But that was the Qataris proving to the Americans that they can deliver. The next part of it was the instruction by the Americans to the Qataris. Now we need a deal, a proposed deal for everybody else, not only the Americans. It was really important for the White House to say, we don't want this to be seen as if we're trying to just get the Americans out and leaving the Israelis behind. And that deal kind of went, I said that I'm not going to go into it, now I'm going into it, but hopefully I'll close it in a bit. But that was the sprint period for us. It worked really, really well. We had the proposal from Hamas through the Qataris. I went to Israel, was there for about a week, working through the approval of that process, of that deal with the Israeli government. I'm never around the table officially. I'm always the guy that have the phone calls on the side and guiding families. We did it through the forum at parts, the forum of the families in Israel, but mainly on individual level. Once we got that approved by the government, I flew, ironically, through Armenia because we had to have a meeting with the Russians on Russian prisoners, but flew to Doha for the implementation. Because for those of you who remember, every single day of this deal was negotiations from the start. Because Hamas never delivered what Israel believed that they should have, and Israel never delivered what Hamas thought that they should have. There's a reason for that. In order to put that deal, the mediators used what is called constructive ambiguity, because there's real gaps between sides, so you bring it close enough and then hope that you can fix it in the last moment things, and we did. And we were able to do it for quite a while until we didn't. And basically, in every single day like that, the Israelis and the Qataris were sitting in the same room, and then the Qataris and Hamas were sitting in a different room and going back and forth. And then I would get phone calls from both the Qataris and from the Israelis, members of the mission, testing with me, asking me to test things with the other side that they cannot raise publicly or formally, sorry. So things like, well, if we can't have the hostages in this category, will Israel still accept another category, and will it pay a higher price for it? And then going to the Israelis, and the Israelis say, well, what if we can't deliver that name of a prisoner, and we have to do a lower level prisoner in this, a Palestinian prisoner in return? All of these kind of games. And it ended up, look, after 54, 55 days, of this, we ended up with 109 hostages that were released through the agreements. And then it failed. And I flew back home, and I knew that we have about at least 10 to 14 days before we can actually re-engage, because this was a time for fighting. And this takes time until people are willing to go back to the negotiation table. But I can tell you this, after 10 days, I was asked by members of the Israeli negotiation team, and I choose my word very carefully, members of the negotiation. It wasn't an official request by the negotiation team, it was members, because as you can imagine, a negotiation team like that, they disagree with each other, but they didn't have the authority from the Prime Minister to actually go to negotiate back in Doha. So they asked me to go and figure out, to get as much information of what is available on a proposal so they can convince the Prime Minister. And so that's what I did in Doha. That's mid-December. Unfortunately, I can tell you, and with that I'll stop and take your questions, that on December 20th, the same deal that we're still talking about until the last 2 days was available. It's just that we had more hostages alive. We couldn't get it done, but it was available since then, and we've been fighting to try and get it since. And I can talk to you about that and dynamic with, but I want to stop here because I want to make sure that you have time to ask questions. So, any questions?
So I actually have a mic, so just, yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Here you go.
Do you have any idea of how many of those hostages are still alive?
The truth is, absolutely, I don't. I don't, because Hamas has zero interest in sharing that information. Quite the opposite from the physics department here, the Schrodinger's cat. You know that when there's a cat in a box, and you don't know if the cat is alive or dead until you open the box. So you can assume that he's either alive or dead, no matter what the cat situation. That is the way they're looking at it. They can benefit. They benefit from us not knowing, because we have to assume they're alive. That's why you see the IDF and the forensics teams in Israel trying to eliminate people out of it. So every time we have enough forensics to say that somebody's dead, the IDF is making it public in order to take that power away from Hamas. I can tell you that the intelligence, again, I don't have security clearance, so my intelligence goes from people coughing up pieces of information by accident. Keith Siegel, who's an American who's being held, his wife Aviva was rescued on day 51. We knew he was alive, and then we had a video of him just about 3 weeks ago, so that was good. Hersh Goldberg-Polin, the intelligence was not good about him, and then he showed up in the video, alive and well. That was Passover. So it's a way of saying, like, nobody really knows a situation. On terms of that, I can tell you that the assessment is between 60 and 80 are alive, but 4 we just rescued, so -4 on that. Yeah, but I can tell you another thing. I am, and I work with the Bibas family very closely. Obviously a very painful one. At the time that the Hamas did the video of Yarden, the father, and all these different statements and working really hard to convince us that the kids are dead and that Shiri is dead. I told him, look, I have no intelligence on this except for the fact that, unfortunately for my work, I think like a terrorist at times. Here's a scenario. The effort by Hamas to convince us that they're dead came at the time that they were supposed to be included in a deal. If, just if, they're actually alive, but they're positioned in a strategic location very near Sinwar himself, that any movement by them might risk operational intelligence for the Israelis, which is the #1 fear for Hamas, then Hamas would work really hard to convince us that they're dead so we can move on. Because otherwise, Hamas doesn't really, they don't care. They typically don't advocate for the dead people unless they have a video of somebody who was living and then a video that he's dead and claiming that the IDF killed them. And in this case, they went really far to try and convince us. And I said, look, and I don't know, maybe it's a 1%, 0.5%. But the truth is, if they're dead, there's nothing we can do to bring them back to life. But if they're alive, there are things that we can do that might kill them. For example, challenging the Hamas to prove to us that they're dead. So the strategy for that would be, you just ignore what Hamas is saying, your advocacy is only to the Israeli government, you demand their return. And look, it's been months since anybody referenced anything about them. I'm praying that I'm somehow in my tiny little, conspiratory thread, I'm right about it. They might be his last insurance policy, because now nobody's assuming that they're alive, so nobody's demanding them within a deal very early on within the living. And when it comes to a worse, Sinwar doesn't care about human life, not the Israeli hostages and not Palestinians. For him, the more Palestinians dead, it's better for him in terms of his, because for him, they're shaheeds, but he's not suicidal. So he might have an insurance policy for himself in this. But that's just to give you sorry, it's a very dark glimpse into the calculations of how we make assumptions about who's there and who's not. Yes? You want the mic?
Thank you. This is great. We heard you a few years ago, and you're still great.
But Duke, I didn't do a repeat on North Korea,
no,
right? That's good,
no,
yeah.
which makes it even greater. Two questions. One, can you talk a little bit about your organization? How many people work with you and kind of the structure of that? And then the more interesting for me question is, how did the Israelis know where the 4 hostages were that were rescued this week?
Yeah.
And you probably can't share a lot, but if you can share a little on how would they know something like that?
So the first one is an easy one. So Richardson Center over the years, and I've been working with him for 17 years until he passed away. The name is Richardson Center for Global Engagement. Sounds big, right? It was Governor Richardson and myself. Every now and then we would have a contractor coming and stuff like that, an advisor here, an advisor there, but it was just the two of us running it on an $800,000 annual budget that includes all the logistics of it. The governor never took a salary from it, I did. But just to put it in perspective, every flight to Myanmar, the charter was $350,000. So you can see, like, you know, in one rescue, you run your annual budget. Since the governor passed away, we realized that the name Richardson is not going to carry the weight that we needed it to. It's not going to be helpful to us in this work. And fortunately, over the last couple of years, especially because of the pandemic, we had a very generous American billionaire named Steve Menzies. He's an insurance guy from Omaha. And he had a jet. So we used a lot when we went to Venezuela, we went to Russia, we used his jet. He came with us. That was his thing. And you know, if those of you who play, I'm terrible at golf, but you know how it is when you go and you play golf for the first time and you hit and you connect really well with the ball and it flies all the way, and at that point you're hooked and you always chase that swing. That's kind of what happened to him. So he saw that because we were able to bring Trevor Reed back home from Russia, and he got hooked. So when the governor passed away, him and I talked, and he said, Mickey, this has to continue. So let's build a new organization. I will underwrite it, but I want you to do it better. Because Governor Richardson is not, you can't find, there isn't another Governor Richardson. But if we can bring, and that's what I came back with, if we can create together a pool of advisors that are mini Richardsons, but bipartisan, and different sections too, like it can be diplomats, can be politicians, it can be businessmen, that they just agree that when we have a specific mission that they might be relevant to, we'll pull them in. We'll staff it, but they'll be the ones that actually we need that face. I'll give you an example of how we did that. I'll give the example now. There's an American, Zach Shaheen. He's been held in the UAE for 16 years. 16 years. But because the UAE is an ally, he's not designated as a wrongfully detained individual. He needs to come home. The Emiratis are very transactional. They respond to either power or potential of power. Governor Richardson had neither. He was a former. He didn't have prospects of coming power again, so he couldn't get anywhere with them on that. And while he was alive, he wouldn't let me tap anybody else because it's a Richardson Center. Again, it's human nature. As soon as he passed, I called Robert O'Brien, who was Trump's former national security advisor. Now, Robert and I are on completely separate realms of reality in terms of where we stand on politically, but Robert O'Brien wants to bring people home. And we have a good relationship. And I said, you know, you're not in power now, but the potential of a Trump presidency provides a potential power. And I need your help to get Zach back home. And he automatically says, absolutely, sign me up. And so we're working on that, and I'm hoping that by the end of the summer we'll succeed on that, because it needs to happen before the elections here, because either he becomes power or he doesn't. so that's one thing that we increased. And the second one, we brought in capacities that we never had before the Richardson Center. Because we have resources, investigative capacities. So for example, I don't know how many of you are aware, but there's an Israeli-Russian student from Princeton, Elizabeth Surkov. She's a PhD student from Princeton. She's been held in Iraq for a year and a half now by a Shia militia. For the first 4 months, nobody knew where she was. FBI was looking into it. Israeli intelligence were looking into it. Nobody could find her. Now I have a billionaire backing me. We bought cell data commercially in Baghdad, cell tower where she was taken, in the area in the cafe where she was taken. And because she was kidnapped 8 days after she had back surgery, we knew what medicines she needed. We bought all the pharmacies' information of where who picked those medicines for the following month. And we shared it with the FBI, and they did their analysis, we did our analysis, triangulated 2 phones, and were able to find her. Now, we didn't get her home. She's still there, but by that, we knew who had her. And once we knew who had her, we were able to solicit a video of proof of life, which we did, and we have that. And the reason why we're able to do it, again, it's not that the FBI could have done it, but it would have taken them months to go through the red tape, signing all that authorization for this. We're able to just do it and then share it with them. So they're very happy with us for doing this. We're very happy on this as well because we're working on that. We're hoping to get a negotiation going there now and get her home. But that capacity we never had before. So now we have it. It's called Global Reach. And you can see it online. It's reach.global. That's the website of it. And now the team is bigger. So in order to do the investigation, because that's not my field, I have Rob Saleh, who used to be the head of the FBI Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell. He went into retirement. I brought him out of retirement. He's working with us, helping us in that relationship with the FBI and the investigative stuff. We have a head of research, Cindy Loricher, and that's relationship research. So when we figure out, like, for example, the organization that holds Elizabeth Surkov, Khatib Hezbollah, we know nothing about them. We have to look at them, who they are, how they operate. She does the research to understand this is the same organization that killed 3 Americans in Jordan in January with a drone. It's the same organization that joined Iran in the drone attack. They're also members of a militia coalition funded by the Iraqi government in a fight against ISIS. In other words, all of our taxpayers' money, some of it goes to military aid to Iraq that goes to that organization that then kills Americans and kidnaps them. That's research that we had to find because we needed to then use it as leverage against the prime minister of Iraq to say, if you don't resolve this hostage case, you have a bilateral issue with Congress that will stop the funding. So things like that, these are the relationship stuff, the research. So that's kind of global reach, and that's what we do. So we're a team now, including me, we're 6, which is a new world for me. I have people to actually do this. It's fantastic. It's great. And we have resources for this, and we don't take funds from any governments, not our government, not foreign governments, which just helps us stay clean. To your second question, sorry, it's a long, Paul, I'm still good, Paul, right? Okay, all right. Look, the IDF has, despite the failures of October 7th on intelligence and operational and tactical, one thing I can give credit to the Israelis, they know how to bounce back very quickly. And we've seen it since. The intelligence abilities, both inside Gaza and in Iran and in Lebanon, inside Hezbollah, this is slowly building up back the deterrence of it or the reputation of it. The Israelis have a lot of intelligence of where people are held. Now, it changes over time, but there's constantly calculations of when you do an operation like that, less so about the civilian casualties around, as we all witnessed, but more so about the ability, the chances of succeeding in getting people alive. And so the few occasions where things aligned, they pulled the trigger and they did it. It wasn't always successful. We know about the successes. We know less about the failures. And look, and it's complicated in my world and in all of our worlds. There is no right decision and wrong decision. It's constantly conflicting values. It's just always is on civilian casualties, on IDF casualty, a soldier that died in that rescue. And more than that, those 4 came home, and I have to say, Noah Gamani, for me, has been one of the high, personal cases to work with, because I have a 10-year-old daughter. Her name is Noah. They look alike. So it's extremely emotional. I'm so happy they're home. I'm fearful because, again, the biggest risk and the biggest fear of Hamas is an operation like that. And now that they're reminded that the IDF keeps looking for those, tomorrow night, the night after, if a dog barks or something falls in the house of a hostage taker, they might kill the hostage, because they're better off with a dead hostage than a live one rescued. It's very complicated. And that doesn't mean that those people should not have been rescued, but it's just very, very complicated. The one thing that is really I'm struggling with personally, because I was crying with tears of joy when I was flying to California from New York and I saw the breaking news on the plane. But I also know we could have gotten them in a deal. And to me, that's always the better option. Yes. Oh, yes. The microphone is running to
Here, we just grab. You have this.
Okay. I'm assuming that I'd like clarification that there's counterparts that work within governments that do what you do, and that you deal with them, and in addition, they in turn deal with their superiors, and it kind of goes round and round?
Yes. So in the U.S. government side, there's 2 entities. One is the fusion cell at the FBI, the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, which is an operational arm that brings together State Department, CIA, DOD, and FBI, and they're working together in one place to resolve their focus on hostages. And at the State Department, there's an office called the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. Washington speak, it's called SPIHA, that's the initials. The ambassador himself is Roger Carstens. He was appointed by Donald Trump, and he's the one guy that Biden administration decided to keep, and he's still there. He's a fantastic guy, good friend of mine. We work officially together, and then we work informally together because we have that kind of trust. Because even for him, even though he's the presidential envoy, he hasn't met the president even once. And so he still needs to work the bureaucracy of this. So his agenda is very much like mine. He works on behalf of families. He's trying to push for them as much as he can, but he's running counter to his policy people who say, don't get me Brittany Griner now. I'm trying to work Ukraine with the Russians. Don't add one more thing to my plate. So it's a constant struggle. Again, not because anybody's bad or evil, but it's just the reality of government and complex interests. So that was the first. And by the way, in Israel, there used to be an arm like that. Then it kind of fizzled out and they rebuilt it very quickly now. It's not functioning that great, like most of the things currently in the government. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. The second question is, I'm curious if your professional skills in negotiation get kind of muddied in your private negotiations. Do you think as much, and in the same way if you're just you're having an argument with somebody close to you?
So here's a true story here. When we need to go and buy a new car, I'm not allowed in the dealership. Only my wife. I joke like, where did you learn? What did I have 2 sources. 50% was Governor Richardson, and 50% is my wife. And Richardson, he was a negotiator, it was an instinct for him. He was doing it from gut. And I was trying to kind of like intellectualize what he was doing and learning from this. My wife taught me everything about emotional intelligence. I'm an Israeli. We're not grown up with emotional intelligence that way. My wife struggles with depression, and for the last 20 years, dealing with her with this and the way she conducts it and the way she deals with it, no shame. She's very open about it. Um, uh, in learning how to work with somebody with depression, it's like you have to accept that you can't understand the way their brain works, but you still need to figure out how to be supportive and helpful. And all of those things that she taught me on this one, I just took and applied it on dictators. But from that perspective, so it's a long way of saying, oh, yeah, it's deep in my personal life, but I have a 10-year-old daughter. When somebody, I have a friend, oh, I got your book. Now it's going to help me to negotiate with my wife and my kids. It's like, oh, no. Wife and kids give up. There's nothing, it's not gonna work. My daughter completely manipulates me.
Mickey, we have a question right here.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you so much. This has been really fascinating. I have two questions at the moment. One is sort of personal and one is kind of transactional. The personal one you've kind of hit on a little bit already from this gentleman's question. So I'll do the transactional one first. You spoke very briefly about the hostage negotiations and Israelis, we'll give you this prisoner. No, we'll give you a high value prisoner. Something that's always struck me, and I'm interested in your insights on it, is in looking at the numbers of hostages over the years traded for prisoners or others. There was only one instance, Mahmoud Hijazi, where there was a one-to-one trade that I've seen. Oftentimes it's with Israel. With Israel, sorry. Oftentimes it's one alive or dead Israeli traded for tens, hundreds, even 1,000 and more than 1,000. Can you give any insight into what the practical implications of that are and what that means in the mindset of Hamas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I also did hint that those deals, by the way, they're bad. They always are bad, but they're the only ones that can be done at times. In my book, I actually talk about the only Gaza part of my book is about negotiations over Gilad Shalit, which I was doing for the first 18 months of that. I didn't conclude it, but I was doing the 18 months of this. Extremely controversial exchange. 1,100 Palestinian prisoners, including Yehia Sinwar in it, the current head of Hamas, for one guy. Now, try to imagine that time we didn't have 120 or 240 hostages, we had one. We had to get him back. Our counterparts in these negotiations, Hamas, don't value life. So the leverage of threatening life or military, it just doesn't apply on that level. We're Jews. We're going to bring our people home. That's the value. So the price for that is the best you can, but it's almost irrelevant. Strategically speaking, whether you release 800 or 900 or 1,100 is not going to be an existential threat to the state of Israel. So the way I think about it, the deal itself was terrible, but it was the only deal that could have brought him home, and that's why it had to happen. The problem was not with the deal. That's the part that I don't say. I'm looking at the camera. I don't say publicly much. The problem is not with the deal. The problem is what we didn't do after the deal. Because you just struck a deal with Hamas. Why are you respecting the deal? Israel used to be really, really good before at saying, look, we'll do what we need to do in order to get our people home. Once they're home, all bets are off. Every single person involved will either be brought to justice, or if we can't, take him out. That was Israel's perspective. That was Munich. And by the way, Bibi Netanyahu and I'm not a fan at all. He did one thing right. One thing. He did commission, funded, and sealed the authorization for an intelligence unit to work from now up to 10, 20 years, I don't know exactly the terms of it, to make sure that every individual that we know was involved in October 7th is on that list. It can't be revoked. Okay? Which is one of the reasons Hamas said, oh, we want immunity. Like, yeah, even if you promise it, it's not going to happen, but it's fine. I mean, we're not doing the deal with respect to people. So that's one angle on this. And for that, you can say, like, I've been dealing with this when I was asking, for an elderly man, it's going to be 10 Palestinian prisoners. But if it's a female soldier, it goes up to 250. Like, and I look at it and it's like, I don't care what the number is, because that's not existential, that's not strategic, makes a difference. And even the Israeli team, members of the Israeli team, knew from the beginning that at the end of this, when all the Israeli hostages are back home, alive or dead, about 8,000 Palestinian prisoners will be out. The math will converge to that. So even if you release all of them for only one Palestinian prisoners, the last one you'll release 8,000 for. So the rest of it was not about the value, the arguing whether you're releasing 100 or 130 per prisoner, but it's about how to get it done so we can move on to the next thing, because everybody accepted the math will converge at the end if we have a deal. By the way, the all-for-all deal was available, and now I'll answer with that one. It's a little bit of a, I'll try and do it in a little bit of a game. So let's say, remind your name, sorry. Daniel, okay. So Daniel, you stole a glass of milk from me. You saw it. Now you stole it, by the way, because you think that my father stole the cow that made the milk, but that's, we'll put that away. You stole that milk. I really want that milk. I tried to grab it, and I can't really reach it, and some of the milk actually spills in the process, but I couldn't get it. And they say, okay, Daniel, tell me, how much for the milk? And you say, $100. I say, you're crazy? You want me to pay you $100 for milk that you actually stole from me? No way. It's like, I have a great idea. I'm going to steal a cookie from you. For sure, if I have a cookie, in return for that cookie, I can give you a little bit more money, but then cookie and the money, and you'll give me the milk. And so I successfully steal your cookie away. And then you come back to me and say, well, now I want my cookie back and $100 for the milk. I said, you just increased the price. Before it was $100 for the milk, now it's $100 and a cookie. You're crazy, irrational, I can't do business with you. And you're saying, no. My deal was that at the end of this process, you have your milk, I have my cookies, I have everything else that I had, and I have $100. It's a silly analogy between the different mindset between Hamas negotiation and Israeli negotiation. We are focused on transaction, and they're focused on a picture, like an end picture or status at the end of this. So because we're focused on the transaction, we think that the more applied pressure militarily on them, whether it's land taking into Gaza or whether it's conditions, will decrease the price of the deal. And they're saying, every time you do that, you take us farther away from the end results, so the list just becomes longer. And the difference is because of the values. What we think we're taking as valuable, it actually helps them from their perspective. More Palestinians dead, more innocent Palestinians dead, more IDF occupation of different areas of Gaza. They're winning on this. Maybe not on the ground in Gaza, but we're all feeling it. They're winning here on this. So it's a very different mentality. And so that whole thing, and look, and I've been doing this for 18 years. Two cardinal truths about hostage negotiations. Number one, the deals never get better over time. They just never get better. We think they might. We try, we squeeze, they never get better. The second truth is that time never benefits the hostages. I don't need to explain that because we're experiencing now, but sometimes before October 7th, I had to explain it a lot of times to the White House. Oh, we'll wait sometimes. Like every day you go to have dinner with your family and I go to have dinner with my family is the day that Paul Whelan might die in prison in Russia. There's urgency here. It just doesn't take. So from that perspective, look, unfortunately, it's painful to say, Hamas beat Israel in tactical and combat on October 7th. They're trying to extract a price for it. We can decide whether we want to pay that price or not. But if we don't pay that price, the lives of the hostages are gone. And that's it's harsh and it's not fair and it's maddening. But I think, and that's where I stand, Israel is strong enough to do the deal that is on the table because there's nothing existentially threatening to Israel on this. Get our people home, or at least as many of them as we can, and then we will be free. Israel will be free to make its own decisions of what is right for it later. It might, and in my silly milk and cookies analogy, I would say, you know, you're now offered to give back the cookies that you took, pay $50, and get half the glass of milk. And while you drink that milk, you can figure out whether it's good enough to be worth the extra $50 or not. But as we're playing this game since mid-December, the milk sours too. And that's, I know it's a silly analogy, I probably went too far with it, but that's kind of how I see it. I hope that answers, yeah.
Mickey,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I am. First of all, I just want to say that I'm pretty sure I speak for everybody here in saying that we feel very lucky to be here this morning and privileged, and you know, I think this is way beyond what any of us expected to be able to get a glimpse of this morning. So thank you, thank you, thank you so much. I don't know. Do you? So, you know, what I wanted to you know, my question, and I do have to run in just a couple of minutes. So, and I don't know if you even want to try on this, but I guess, you know, what I think, what I'm wondering, and I think most of us are, is, you know, not for you to look into a crystal ball, but just to say, you know, well, what are the 2 or 3 possible ways that this plays out? You know, obviously, you know, nobody knows the future, but it does seem like you have a better ability to kind of map out possible scenarios than most of us.
Yeah,
do.
and I'll try. Let me start with the optimism part of it, because I am an optimist despite everything I just talked about. I do think that Israel, the society in Israel, the community in Israel, is going to come out of this leapfrogging. I think there will be a new social contract in Israel. I think we're going to march very close to a constitution in Israel. But for that to happen, the war needs to end, because it's an internal process. But when it happens, it's the only way it can move forward in Israel. So I am optimistic about that, because the Israeli people, at the end of the day, we know who they are. They're our family. They're some of us. They're us. We know who they are. We know what their values. We're Jews. We know what we stand for. They're going to come together. This has been a moment of clarity for a lot of this. And I'm looking here. Tom is sitting here. Tom's parents and I went to high school together. We're good friends. He's now here, just graduating from UC Santa Barbara. We were just talking about it before. Tom was in Israel last summer, before October 7th, and seen, like, being a part of the demonstrations and the movement there. It's not about right and left. It's about being Israeli and understanding what is a society, what is a shared future for the country. So I do think that Israel is going to leapfrog out of this from a society perspective, and it's going to be way, way better and stronger from that perspective. Unfortunately, we haven't hit rock bottom yet. There's 3 elements that we need to deal with. One, Gaza. From my perspective, again, horse with blinders, hostages, I have a twofer there. I believe the war needs to end. I think we're running out of targets. I think we're running out of objectives, and the objective of a war is not to eliminate your enemy. It's in order to provide you for a pathway for a political solution. And that solution is wide open and existent for us. The United States is guaranteeing it. We just need to get out of the trauma of it and figure out that that's what's needed. We have a real serious problem in the north. My brother, his wife, and his 3 kids have been displaced for 9 months. They lived in Kibbutz Nir in the north, next to Lebanon. There's the Lebanon. I served in South Lebanon. My 6 years of service were there, in the security buffer zone that was north of Israel. Now that buffer zone is inside Israel. 120,000 Israeli citizens are under that threat right now. It can go bigger when it escalates, but there's a problem there. There's a hypothetical political solution to it, but it's not materializing. So there has to be a way to fix this. But Israel can't do it with 400,000 reservists committed in Gaza for 9 months, they are also the engine of the economy. So we have to deal with that. Putting all of that aside, once that is done or settled somehow, the Israeli society will have to come to grips, and it's going to be more complicated than it was before October 7th to push forward. And I fear that it might get violent internally, but if it does, the minute it does, it also stops and we're done, I think, because I think that's the part that will trigger the depth of the problem that we're at, and the population will rise up and fix it. I know that's not extremely optimistic, but I do think, in terms of us, though, as a Jewish community in the United States, and Tom and I just talked about it before because of the experience on campuses and what's happening, we have our work cut for ourselves for years now. It's not because everybody's an anti-Semite. There is real anti-Semitism that has been dormant or not so dormant, and now has found a funnel into the brains of a lot of people who are just feeling angry for a variety of reasons. And even if the war stops tomorrow, those feelings and the information that we're given is not going to be erased. It's going to keep popping up anytime there's half an incident. And so I know that as a Jewish community, we all came together and piled resources and are fighting this. It's a marathon. And so that's going to take us a long time to work. And I think that the best allies for us in this to invest in are the ones that seem to be our enemies in this. It's the other minority groups in the United States who are going to, which Jews and those minority groups, we used to be allies. We used to support and work together, and somehow October 7th, it all dissipated as if none of the content matters. It's just because we're Jews, it doesn't matter. We have to fight through it. We have to repenetrate that in the long term.
Thank you so much.
Please buy the book.
Thank you again, Mickey.